On my wedding day, my fiancé's first love appeared at the wedding ceremony wearing the exact same haute couture gown as mine. I watched them stand together at the entrance, greeting the guests as if they were the bride and groom, maintaining a calm expression. I complimented them, saying they looked like the perfect couple, beauty and brains, a match made in heaven. She burst into tears and fled the scene. He, however, didn't hesitate to humiliate me in front of everyone, accusing me of being petty and narrow-minded when the wedding banquet was over. He left for what was supposed to be our honeymoon, with her by his side. I didn't argue or cause a scene. Instead, I quietly booked an appointment for an abortion. By the time I returned home, it was already late into the night. The pale moonlight spilled into the living room, casting a cold, desolate glow over the space. Exhausted, I dragged myself to the bedroom, only to be greeted by the sight of the colorful wedding decor on the walls. How ironic, I thought to myself. The festive ribbons on the bed hadn't been cleared away, but I was too worn out to care. I lazily swept them off the bed and collapsed onto the soft mattress, feeling the weight of the day press down on me as I plugged my phone into charge. A notification coincidentally caught my eye. A post from Susie McKinney on her social feed. "Grateful for your presence. Not a moment wasted," was the caption. The attached photo showed Hank holding her in his arms, the two of them gazing into each other's eyes, barely a centimeter apart, lips on the verge of meeting. Matching couple rings gleamed on their fingers. If it were in the past, I would have stormed over and demanded an explanation from him. But now I just quietly turned off my phone, rolled over, and went asleep. The following days passed in silence. I didn't receive a single message from Hank. Instead, my feed was constantly flooded with Susie's updates. Photos of them kissing, shopping, laughing together as if flaunting their happiness for the world to see. I didn't react, didn't feel anger or sadness. Instead, I contacted a lawyer and began preparing for a divorce. Hank Dawson and I had been together for 8 years since our university days. Although we had only recently hosted our wedding ceremony, in actuality, we had sealed our marriage legally right after graduation. It was a quiet, impulsive moment. No ceremony, no bridal gifts, no jewelry, just the reckless passion of two young lovers. But now that passion had long since faded, leaving behind nothing but a mess to clean up. Nearly 2 weeks later, I was sitting at home reviewing the draft my lawyer had prepared for the divorce. The house was quiet, but suddenly the sound of a key turning in the lock broke the silence. I looked up, and there they were, Hank walking in hand with Susie. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of awkwardness splash across his face. He quickly let go of her hand. His voice strained as he tried to explain. "Susie's never been to the beach before, so I took her. Didn't the doctor say you should be careful for her?" Before he could finish, I looked away, my eyes drifting back to the legal document in front of me. I nodded, barely interested.
"Lem."
"Okay," I replied, dismissive. "Go ahead." Whatever else he was about to say caught in his throat. Seeing me sit there, calmly focused on the computer screen, completely unmothered, seemed to anger him even more. His voice grew cold, and he lashed out. "Do you have to be like this? I already told you Susie's never been to the beach. That's why I took her. It's not a big deal. And why are you making a scene? It's not like we can't go on the honeymoon anytime. What's your problem?" He kept rambling, the frustration clear in his voice. "And how many times do I have to tell you? Here is nothing between me and Susie." I cut him off mid-sentence, tired of the same old lie. "You and her are just like brother and sister." "Yes, I know." I looked at him, my expression calm and indifferent. There wasn't any trace of anger. Pink's face, however, grew colder. His brows furrowed in frustration. His voice, laced with helplessness, cut through the room. "Then what are you upset about this time?" "I am busy," I replied, my attention already back on the draft in front of me, completely uninterested in meeting his gaze. Seeing the tension, Susie quickly stepped forward, gripping Hank's wrist with a performative air of concern. She added fuel to the fire with her sweet saccharine tone. "Please, Pearl, don't be mad. You mustn't argue with Hank because of me." "Hank, May not have taken you with him this time, but he bought you a special gift from the beach. She turned to him, her voice dripping with faux innocence. Hank, hurry and show her the present. Hank, eager to please, fished out a small box from his pocket. He opened it and pushed it toward me as if he were presenting a grand gesture. I bought it just for you. Go on, take a look at it. His face gleamed with smug satisfaction, as if he expected me to be overwhelmed with gratitude. I glanced at the box. Inside was a simple pair of floral-shaped earrings, the edges lined with tiny diamonds and the petals crafted from blue gemstones. They were dainty, delicate. I took one look, then pushed the box back toward him without a second thought. No need, I am not interested in collecting trinkets. The room fell into an awkward silence. The atmosphere thickened with tension as Hank's face darkened. What do you mean by that, Pearl Jennings? I glanced at the exquisite diamond bracelet wrapped around Susie's wrist, the kind of piece that screamed seven-figure luxury. My eyes drifted back to Hank's face, steady and unbothered before I spoke. What I said is what I meant. You give her the bracelet, and me. What a trinket. Do you think I'm only worth some throwaway gift? Hank, caught off guard, blinked in awkward silence, clearly not expecting me to call him out so directly. But Susie jumped in before he could recover her voice, dripping with that practiced sweetness. Pearl, don't be upset. Hank only gave me the bracelet because I liked it so much. But if it bothers you, I'll return it. Please don't let this come between you two. It's not worth it. Her words oozed with innocence, but her hands never moved to take off the bracelet. Instead, she blinked up at him with teary eyes, each drop perfectly timed, slipping down her cheeks like rain on cue. And of course, Hank folded. He pulled her into his arms like she was the one who needed comforting as he glared at me. Don't listen to her, Susie. That bracelet is yours once a gift is given. It stays with the person it's meant for. She's always been petty like this, getting worked up over nothing. I didn't bother responding. My attention had already returned to the glowing screen in front of me, but my silence only fueled his frustration. His face hardened as he wrapped his arm tighter around Susie and stormed out of the house. He made a show of slamming the door open wide, standing there waiting for me to give in like I always had, but not this time. I didn't even look up. Instead, I quietly added the cost of that bracelet, those millions he'd spent on her, into the asset division stretch with a final angry slam. He shut the door behind him. It wasn't long after they left that my parents called, asking me to come over for dinner. When I arrived at their place, who do I run into at the door but Hank? He looked at me, something like guilt flickering across his face before he smoothed it over with a forced calm. Are we going in together? He asked, trying to sound casual. I nodded and walked inside without a word. My parents hadn't forgiven him for what had happened at the wedding. Their coldness was obvious in every curt exchange, every sidelong glance in the past. I might have stepped in to smooth things over, playing the mediator between my parents and Hank, but not now. This time I let him sit there alone, awkward as the tension thickened around us. When dinner finally ended and I was ready to call a cab, Hank pulled up in his car. I opened the door to get in, only to see a sticker plastered across the front passenger seat reserved for Susie. He cleared his throat, obviously uncomfortable, and tried to explain. Susie insisted on putting it there. You don't sit here much anyway. I nodded, my voice calm and flat.
Right. She's young.
That's what girls her age do. He frowned as if he wanted to say more, but my phone. Before he could, I ignored him, focusing on the messages that needed my attention. By the time I was done, we had already arrived at the villa. I stepped out of the car, and before I could take another breath, Susie was already rushing toward him, practically throwing herself into his arms. Hank, I missed you so much, she chirped. Maybe it was because I was standing right there, but Hank looked uncomfortable again. He quickly pushed her away before she could plant a kiss on his cheek. Come on, Susie, stop acting so childish. You're too old for this. She shot me a smug look, her voice full of playful sweetness. So what if I am? We're still super close. I ignore their little exchange, deciding to walk straight into the house. But as soon as I reached the entrance, something caught my eye. a series of photos flashing across the electronic display on the wall. They were all of Susie and Hank. Some showed them cuddling while watching the sunrise. Others were of them dining together. And the last one, the both of them locked in a passionate kiss. I had barely glanced at the photos when Hank rushed over to my side. His voice hurried. Desperate, Pearl. These photos. They're fake. You have to believe me. Please don't get upset. It's not good for the baby. I turned to face him, catching the flicker of guilt in his eyes. I nodded. They look well taken, though. His brow furrowed deeper, confusion clear on his face. Pearl, aren't you angry? I kept my expression steady.
Calm.
No, not at all before. He could press further. My phone rang. It was the doctor calling to discuss the details of my hospital stay tomorrow. I walked away to answer the call, without giving Hank's reaction a second thought. By the time I returned to the event, the scene unfolding in front of me was all too familiar. Hank stood there, shielding Susie, his voice raised as he berated someone from their heated exchange. It wasn't hard to piece together what had happened. Sheban had accidentally spilled a bit of wine on the hem of Susie's dress, and now Hank was demanding an apology. Relentlessly watching this unfold triggered a memory one from years ago. We had been at another banquet, much like this one. I was standing near the champagne tower when Susie shoved me. Seemingly by accident, I lost my balance, crashing into the tower, shattering glasses as I fell, champagne and blood mixed as they dripped down my body. I had looked to Hank for help, but instead, he had unleashed his fury on me, his words sharp and cutting in front of everyone. Can't you walk properly? You didn't see the giant champagne tower right in front of you. Do you know how important this event is? What's the point of someone as useless as you even being alive? His final words had been the cruelest. If I were you, I'd throw myself headfirst into the nearest wall, snapping back to the present. I watched him now, the same man protecting Susie over a minor accident. It was laughable, really, without another word. I turned on my heel and walked away.
Hank didn't come home last night.
I wasn't surprised. This wasn't the first time, but as I was finishing up in the bathroom, I saw him walking in with breakfast in hand and trailing right behind him was Susie. When he saw me, he placed the breakfast on the dining table and for once offered an explanation. Susie was scared to be alone, so I sent her home. It was already the middle of the night, so I just slept over. Susie, clinging to his arm, chimed in, her tone laced with mock innocence. That's right, Pearl, you're not mad, are you? I nodded without speaking. Hank seemed to pick up on my coldness, and with a rare gentleness in his voice, he placed the breakfast down and tried again. Didn't you say you've been wanting to see that new movie? I have time today. I can take you. That movie, praised by everyone since its release, had been something I asked him about again and again. Each time he turned me down, claiming he was too busy with work. Yet just a few days later I saw him in Susie's Instagram post. The best movie with the best person was the caption. Though their faces weren't visible, the picture of their hands intertwined said more than enough. Even if I hadn't seen his face, I would have known it was him. The faint trace of perfume on him, now not mine, made my decision easy. No need, I said, my voice calm. I've got something to do today. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face like he hadn't expected the rejection. He opened his mouth to say something else, but Susie had already made herself comfortable on the couch, looking at me with wide-eyed innocence. Pearl, when you say you are busy, does that mean you are meeting your university friend? I shot her a sharp look, suspicion creeping in. The only person who knew I wanted to initiate a divorce was my lawyer, and that lawyer was an old university friend. No one else knew about the matter. Seeing my suspicious look, Susie quickly turned to Hank with a look of false innocence. Hank, don't be angry when you hear what I'm about to tell you. A few days ago, my friend told me they saw Pearl with her university friend at a California acting, but she paused deliberately, feigning hesitation before continuing in a softer, fearful tone. Intimate on. But maybe my friend was mistaken. After all, how could Pearl ever cheat on you? She loves you so much, Hank. Moment those words left her mouth, Hank's face twisted in fury. Without warning, he slammed his hand down, sending the boss on the table, crashing to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. His eyes burned with rage as they locked onto me. Pearl, so you're not coming to the movies with me because you are sneaking around with another man?
He spat.
Do you think you are being fair to the child you are carrying? I glanced at the shards scattered across the floor, but said nothing. Before I could speak, Susie, pretending to be the peacemaker, jumped in again. Hank, please don't get mad. Let's talk calmly. It's not all her fault, after all, her mother also. But before she could finish that vile sentence, I grabbed the napkin from the table and threw it at her, my hand trembling with rage. She could slander me all she wanted, but she had no right to insult my mother. The napkin left a red mark on her, and she immediately looked up at Hank with teary, wounded eyes. As expected, he rushed over to her, lifting her arm in concern. Seeing her pitiful expression, he glared at me, pointing his finger with unrestrained fury. Pearl, you've disappointed me beyond words. Even if what Susie said was untrue, you had no right to lay a hand on her. His accusations came rapid fire. You should know better. I cut him off sharply, my voice cold. So you know she's lying. His face froze, caught in his own words, but it quickly shifted back to self-righteous indignation as he pointed at me again. Yes, I saw it too that day. But even so, you're still wrong to hit her. Apologize to Susie now, or we're getting divorced. A chill ran through my body, spreading like ice. Stared at him in disbelief, still holding on to a shred of hope. A final attempt to salvage what little remained between us. Hank, I said, my voice low but steady. I've scheduled an abortion. Will you go with me tomorrow? He scoffed, the sound dripping with mockery, as if I had just told a ridiculous joke. Pearl, I've told you this before. Hank snapped, his tone sharp. You can use your pregnancy as an excuse for your tantrums. Apologize to Susie right now, or we'll go get divorced this instant. His words made me laugh in disbelief and anger. I reached into my bag, pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared long ago, and threw them onto the table in front of him. Let's sign.
Let's go get divorced now.
Hank's expression darkened the moment he saw the papers. He glared at me, his mood shifting from arrogance to something colder. And your Pearl. You were still carrying our child, he said. And Spur, you were just being sensitive because of the pregnancy. I can forgive you for acting impulsively. I met his gaze unflinching, and after a long pause I spoke. Hank. No one knows better than you whether I can being impulsive or not. His face froze. Susie, standing nearby, opened her mouth to speak, but was cut off by Hank before she could say a word.
Sense.
Susie, we need to talk in private.
Please go home for now.
Okay? She hesitated, her eyes widening as they darted to the divorce agreement and its detailed property division. Her expression twisted in anger, and she looked like she was about to start shouting at me. But Hank quickly ushered her out the door before she could cause a scene. The moment she left, his demeanor changed. His voice softened with a hint of pleading. Man, sure, Pearl. I know you were upset about how close Susie and are, but trust me, I only see her as a sister. You will always be my wife, the one who holds the title of Madam in the Dawson family. What would become of our child if we divorce now? You going to let them grow up in a broken home? Stayed silent, watching him intently. You don't love me. I said, my voice steady and clear. We can divorce. Give Susie the title she has been fighting for.
You'd be happy about that at that.
His face contorted with frustration, and he angrily tossed the divorce papers aside. Amber. How could I not love before he could finish? His phone rang, and without needing to look, I already knew it was Susie. That special ringtone had been burned into my memory under my unwavering gaze. Hank hesitated for only a second before answering the call. Whatever was said on the other end made him immediately stand up. Susie's in trouble. I need to go check on her, he said. I stared at him, my face emotionless, offering no response before leaving. He leaned down as if trying to kiss me goodbye, but I instinctively pulled away. He stood there awkwardly frozen in place. I'm sure, Pearl, I promise. After this, I will keep my distance from Susie, he said. I picked up the divorce agreement from the floor, my voice cold and steady. Enter tomorrow morning 9 a.m. at the obstetrics gynecology department of the Women's and Children's Hospital. Don't be late. Hank nodded eagerly, mumbling promises as he rushed out the door as if the person waiting outside was the most important one in his life. I didn't respond. I simply deleted and blocked all his contact information. The next morning 9 a.m. came and went, but Hank never showed up. It didn't matter. My parents accompanied me to the hospital, standing by as I walked into the surgery room. The operating room was cold, the air chilling me to the bone, though nothing could compare to the cold that pierced me when the forceps entered my body. Under the anesthesia, I slowly lost consciousness. When I woke again, I was lying in a hospital bed. My parents were there, and my mother's two tin-filled eyes immediately overflowed. The moment she saw me awake, she grabbed my hand, her voice thick with concern. "Amber Pearl, does it hurt?" I smiled and shook my head. Most of they gave me anesthesia, so it doesn't hurt. My mother looked like she wanted to say something more, but hesitated. My father, silent until now, sat stoically nearby. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice firm. "Mother Bouquet." My mother, however, continued to fret over me, worried that the procedure would leave me with lasting complications. Every day, she brought meals from home, carefully ensuring that I recovered under her watchful care. With her devoted attention, my body slowly regained its strength. By the second day, I could get out of bed and walk on my own, filling the doctor's advice. I took slow steps around the hospital corridor, trying to build back my strength. My parents were still worried. When it was mealtime, my mother had gone to prepare food and my father went to fetch water, leaving me alone for a moment as I walked down the hall. He tax-expectedly ran straight into Hank, who was helping Susie walk. They both froze upon seeing me. After an awkward silence, Hank spoke first, his voice faltering. "Minced you, Pearl." Susie had a progesterone rupture. I was really worried about her, so I came to the hospital with her. He then added, "Man, I didn't know you were at this hospital for how are your test results?" I didn't want to engage with them and turned to leave, but before I could get far, Hank grabbed my wrist. "I didn't know I'm the child's father. I'm your husband." Hank looked at me in disbelief, his hand trembling as he pointed at me, trying to say something before he could speak. Susie suddenly collapsed weakly, calling out for him. "Oh, poor hand, Hank." But this time Hank didn't rush to her. His eyes remained fixed on me, red with rage and disbelief. Not wanting to escalate things further, my father quickly helped me back to the hospital room, worried Abbe Elaine something else might happen. Later, as my mother laid out the meal she read prepared, a knock came at the door. The next second, Hank stepped inside and she dabbered Dad. "I came to see Pearl." My father's expression darkened immediately. His voice was icy. "Ampute, Mr. Dawson, you must be joking. My wife and I don't dare accept being called your half for Dad and Munch Mom." Guilt filled Hank's face, and behind him his parents followed. Hank's mother offered me an awkward smile while his father, without a word, kicked Hank hard. Then Hank's father quickly turned to me with a placating tone. "Moat Pearl, we've heard everything. It was all Hank's fault," he said. "He knows he was wrong. We are truly sorry. You've been treated so poorly." My mother glared at him, about to speak, but I caught her wrist, stopping her. I gave her a look and spoke calmly. "Frenchie, Mr. and Mrs.
Dawson.
You both know how Hank has treated me throughout our marriage all these years. But I don't want to dwell on the past. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., let's meet at courthouse to finalize the divorce." Hank's face turned pale. He walked to the side of the hospital bed and dropped to one knee, kneeling at my bedside. "Blue Pearl, I know I was wrong," he pleaded.
"But please Dawn to divorce me.
"I truly can't live without you." Tears started to roll down from the corners of his eyes. I scoffed, looking at him with a mocking smile. "Munchard Hank, when you called me petty on our wedding day, you didn't feel any love for me. When you went on a honeymoon with Susie, you didn't feel any love for me. Now that we divorcing, suddenly, you feel like you love me again." I sneered. "Well, cheer love is really cheap." Hank's father, enraged by my words, threw another punch at Hank while his mother followed with a slap. Her slap wasn't as harsh as her heart was still clearly aching for her son. She tried to reach out and grab my hand, but when I dodged her touch, she didn't take offense. Instead, she spoke with a guilty expression. "Mambo Pearl, I know this whole thing is Hank's fault, but truly, he only ever saw Susie as a little sister. Bucks, do you know what they say? Hondo's fate that brings two lovers together. It hasn't been an easy and Hank to get here so far in life together. For you, what do you think of this? Just forgive Hank this one time. I promise if he ever does this again. All the property, thus the house, car, and every share in the company ends will go to you. Hank will walk away with nothing. Would that be enough for you?" Hank's mother had always been the one with the final say in their family, and even now her words held weight. Hank knelt beside her, his eyes red as he looked at me. "Unsuperior, I promise. From now on, I recut all ties with Susie. I swear I never contact her again. Just give me one more chance." My parents wanted to object, but I gently pressed their wrists to keep them silent. I pulled a document from my bag.
Kalita.
Different divorce agreement than the one I had shown before. This one stated that Hank would leave with nothing.
Fine.
"As long as Hank signs this divorce agreement," I said. Hank's mother frowned. Just as she was about to reach for the agreement, Hank snatched it up himself. Without hesitation, he pulled a pen from his pocket and signed his name. "Will you forgive me now?" You take his almost desperate expression. I smiled and took the signed agreement from his hands. "Munch dried," I said. "Ambly, I forgive you." After they left, my mother looked at me with disapproval. "Mo Pearl, are you really going to stay with Hank?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "Amit, are you afraid that after the divorce you want to have anywhere to go?" "Don't worry. Even if you divorce him, your father and I will still take care of you." I was touched by her words, my eyes welling up with tears, but I shook my head and gently reassured her. "Munter Mom Dick worry. I am not going to stay with Hank. I have my reasons for doing this." She seemed ready to argue further, but when she saw the determination in my eyes, she simply sighed and shook her head in resignation. In the days that followed, Hank kept his word. He cut all ties with Susie, dicking and blocking every contact in front of me. He began to dote on me every day, constantly checking in to make sure I was okay, as if terrified that something might go wrong. During this time, Susie tried to see him several times, but each time he rejected her. Still, I knew he wouldn't be able to hold out for long.
Soon.
The day of my follow-penned-up checkup arrived. The night before, I casually brought it up, pretending not to notice the guilty look in his eyes. "Nikonk, I have a checkup tomorrow. You'll come with me, won't you?" He quickly nodded, promising. "And Mr. Pearl, of course. Don't worry, I will definitely go with you tomorrow." Satisfied, I smiled and nodded in return. Then, while he went out to buy something, I sent a message to Susie Membian. "It seems you were not that important to Hank after all. He told me Vig's definitely going with me to hospital tomorrow and said being with you is just a passing fling." Susie took the bait. After some back-tend and pens forth, she finally responded. Though her tone was defensive and just "I show you," I knew she wouldn't let me down. Court enough. My gamble paid off. On the day of my follow quiz-up appointment, Hank didn't. Instead, photos of him passionately kissing Susie outside her apartment made the headlines. We had climbed up the financial ranks from nothing together.
Quarter.
His family had some resources, but most of our success came after we got married. We had built our business brick by brick in the toughest times. We had even marketed our love story to boost product sales, using our relationship as a shield for the brand. Now, the moment those photos of him kissing Susie hit the internet, a storm of outrage followed. People flooded the comments, calling him heartless and opportunistic. They accused him of betraying the very foundation of our success. Now that he had made it big, I didn't let it get to me. Instead, I sent him a message with the divorce appointment I had already scheduled at the courthouse moat tomorrow at 9 a.m. Meet me at the courthouse. He didn't respond, but when I got home, I found him sitting in the darkened living room. The room was cold, and he was crouched in a corner of the coffee table, surrounded by bottles of red and white wine. When he saw me, his eyes were red and he looked at me, humbled and broken. Pearl, I really know I was wrong. We have been together for so long.
Binomi.
I've never done anything to truly betray you. I'd hide if you love me, I know. And I also know that no matter how far you went with Susie, you never crossed that final line. I spoke calmly, as if we were discussing someone else. Once I know Susie was just a fleeting distraction for you, I know you. I've always loved me, with every word I spoke. Hope returned to his eyes, and by the time I finished, he was looking at me with renewed belief.
Hence do Pearl, since you understand.
Does that mean we? But before he could finish, I shattered his hopes without mercy. Must number at night's over. Hank, you already signed the divorce agreement, and it clearly states you will leave with nothing. If you come with me tomorrow to finalize the divorce, we can reconsider the division of assets and maybe leave you with the company. But if you don't show up, I will take the divorce agreement to court, and you won't get a single cent. Hank stared at me in disbelief, as if he couldn't accept that these words had come from my mouth. Pearl, are you really going to go through with this? His voice trembled with a mixture of disbelief and desperation. I glanced at the empty bottles on the table, my gaze cold and unyielding. Must you know me? Once I make a decision, you never go back on it. A bitter smile spread across his face as he leaned back and collapsed onto the floor, defeated. Miss Dear Pearl, you don't understand. His voice wavered as he stared up at the ceiling, tears of regret rolling down his face. Marriage. When I was young, my parents were strict. They wouldn't let me have friends. Only Susie was willing to be my friend. So, Riasa, he kept talking, pouring out the reasons for his attachment to Susie, the regrets and justifications. But I didn't care to listen. His excuses meant nothing to me. I turned away and headed to the bedroom, shutting out his voice as I prepared for bed. By the time morning came, even though I knew he didn't want to, Hank was left with no choice. For the sake of his family, he had to go according to my plans. The moment I held the divorce certificate in my hand, a wave of relief washed over me. I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders without sparing a glance at Hank's ashen face. I strode out of the courthouse, my steps brisk and full of purpose. Just as I neared the exit, I felt a tug on my wrist. Turning around, I saw him bend disheveled, his eyes rimmed with red, looking at me with a pitiful expression of desperation. Pearl, give me one more chance, please, he pleaded, his voice trembling with hope. Munstell, I can make things right, I swear. Just trust me. I shook his hand off with a smirk, my voice cold and sharp.
Divorce.
Now there are no more chances. He opened his mouth as if to say something else, but had no interest in hearing him out. True to my word, I left the company in his hands, then packed my bags and headed for Yento's Pair, the place I had once dreamed of us spending our honeymoon. I had imagined countless times what it would be like to come to this city with him driving through the streets together. But now that I was here alone, I realized I didn't need anyone to enjoy it. I explored new places, embraced different cultures, and indulged in local delicacies. The journey turned out to be everything I had hoped for and more. 2 months later, I returned. By then, Hank's company had crumbled under the weight of scandal and mismanagement, and he had declared bankruptcy. Just as I had planned, I swooped in to buy it back at a fraction of its value. This way, someone else bore the brunt of the public backlash, and I was able to reclaim the company at a bargain. When I next saw Hank, it was in the CEO's office, Tenzin, the very office that had once been his. But this time I walked in not as an employee, but as the new owner and Brattan. Long time no see, I greeted him with a casual smile. The man in front of me was a shadow of his former self, Carson, humbled and visibly worn down by the 2 months of chaos. Nastant Pearl Flynn, he began, but I cut him off, my tone commanding. Master should address me as the CEO now. I corrected him. I saw a flicker of emotions flash through his eyes. Ending your regret.
Sorrow.
Buff and Buddy quickly suppressed them. Under my orders, Hank moved out of the company within 3 days. With swift action and decisive management, I quickly revived the company's operations. However, To fully restore the brand's reputation, I had no choice but to release the provocative videos that Susie had sent me in the past. As soon as those videos went public, the internet erupted in outrage. Susie was bombarded with insults, with countless people flooding her old posts, flaunting her affair, calling her shameless for knowingly becoming a mistress. As for Hank, the mastermind behind it all, he didn't escape the storm either. His phone number was leaked, and his private information was plastered all over the web. Forced to disconnect from the world, he shut off his phone and retreated from the internet entirely over time. The relentless pressure took a toll on his mental health. What started as a fear of leaving his home spiraled into a crippling anxiety that left him unable to face anyone. His parents tried to suppress the media frenzy as fast as they could, but the ever-been-sourceable internet users soon uncovered more secrets. Public outrage poured into official channels, and in the end, both of his parents were fired from their positions just as they neared retirement. Meanwhile, my company soared to new heights. The scandal had inadvertently bolstered our image, and our profits skyrocketed, surpassing previous records by leaps and bounds. My net worth too multiplied several times over. As per Hank, I hadn't seen him since our divorce. I only heard rumors that his mental state had deteriorated. He either stayed locked inside his home or roamed the streets aimlessly. His parents tried countless times to intervene, but he ignored them, instead choosing to lose himself in the digital world. Her family had always relied on Hank's support. So, with his downfall, her fortunes crumbled during the divorce proceedings. I'd filed a claim to recover all the money spent on her during our marriage. Although Hank hadn't bought her anything of immense value beyond a diamond bracelet, it was enough to leave her financially ruined. At the company's annual party, the venue was ironically chosen at the very place where I had once held my wedding. This time, however, I wasn't left behind by anyone. Instead, I was escorted to the stage like a queen, surrounded by admiration and respect. What I didn't expect was to see Hank again after my speech. It was the dead of winter, with snowflakes gently drifting through the air. He stood outside, shivering in tattered clothes, a far cry from the confident man he once was. Several veteran employees recognized him and started whispering among themselves as they pointed at his pitiful figure. I watched from the stage as he with sudden excitement rushed towards me, but just as he was about to reach me, the security guards intervened, stopping him in his tracks, desperate and unhinged. He stretched out his hand toward me, pleading in a frantic voice. "Men Scout Pearl, Pearl. I truly know I was wrong. Please forgive me. Nuried me, won't." I didn't go to him. Instead, out of consideration for our past, I had someone call his parents and ask them to come take him away. As the event wrapped up, I chose not to have the driver take me home. I preferred the solitude of driving myself slowly, making my way down the mountain road.